أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. God states in the Holy Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, and by the soul and he who fashioned it, then inspired it to understand what is wrong and what is right for it. Indeed, he succeeds who purifies it, and indeed he fails who corrupts it. Amanna billah, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. Let us begin by enlivening our hearts and minds and our gathering with the remembrance of the Holy Prophet and his purified progeny. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. If someone were to ask you, who are you? What is your identity? How would you respond? What would you say? Depending on likely where you are in your life journey, you might answer this question in various ways. You might begin to answer this question by stating your name. When asked, who are you? You state your name. My name is so-and-so. You might state your age, maybe, or you might hide your age. You might state whether you are male or female. You might state your nationality, your race or your ethnicity. You might identify yourself and introduce yourself with your likes, with your hobbies, with your skills. Maybe you might introduce yourself, if you're a college student, for instance, with your major, or with your job or your career, or many other factors. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, he says in the hadith, the well-known hadith, he says, "Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah." The one who knows him or herself will know his or her Lord. It's a profound hadith. Here the Prophet is telling us that one of the prerequisites to knowing God is to know oneself, is to have a sense of self. And thus, it's important for us, all of us, to spend the time and the effort to truly get to know and to build our sense of self. Because without knowing ourselves, we cannot know the world around us and we cannot know God before us. We spend time and effort. and we ponder and reflect on the question, who am I? What makes myself? What are the aspects of my identity that make me me? And this is a question that we all wrestle with, dear friends. We wrestle with this question, with figuring out and maintaining our sense of self and our identity. So who am I? What is my identity? The question, apparently, the question of who are you or who am I, apparently seems to be a simple question, no? We hear it all the time. But in fact, we find that the issue of identity is one that is quite complex, if we really think about it. For one, our identity is composed of various aspects. There is the personal aspects of our identities, things that are unique to us as individuals, things that relate to our individual circumstances that set us apart from others. Things that are unique, and you can think of many examples, things that are very unique to yourself. This is one aspect of our identity. Then there is the social aspect of our identity. The groups that we belong to. It could be your family. What does it mean to belong to a particular family? Or your religious community. What does it mean to belong to a particular religious community with respect to your identity? Maybe it means the college or the university that you're enrolled with. Maybe it means something else like the fans of particular soccer teams. You have Messi fans and you have Ronaldo fans. And may Allah guide the Ronaldo fans to the truth. So for one, our identity is complex because it is composed of the personal aspects of our identity and also the social aspects of our identity. And sometimes it can get messy when those come together, no pun intended. When they come together, it can get complicated. It can get complex. Additionally, another aspect to consider of the complexity of identity is that some facets of our identity are chosen for us, like our family. We don't choose who our parents are. Did any of you choose your parents? None of you chose your parents. Did any of you choose your siblings? None of you chose your siblings, right? There are other aspects that are chosen for us, aspects of our identity. Many that are chosen for us. And some that we decide and that we choose and that we highlight. And so it's important for us to ask, what do I choose? What aspect of my identity do I choose? And more importantly, what do I highlight? Because there are many aspects to our identity, some of which we tend to highlight and some of which we tend to hide and put aside, right? Again, if we think of when we are asked to identify ourselves or who we are, we find that sometimes we may highlight our nationality. Someone asks you, who are you? You say, I am Afghan American. Right? Or sometimes it may be that you may highlight your job or your career. I'm a business person. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a doctor. Right? Or sometimes it may be that you highlight your socioeconomic status. I'm a millionaire. I'm a billionaire. Right? Or sometimes you may highlight certain feelings that you have or certain desires that you have. They come to the forefront of your identity, what you choose to highlight, what you choose to identify as. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we choose? What do we include when it comes to our identity and expressing this identity? What do we highlight and what do we hide? This is a question that is important for all of us to consider. When it comes to Islam, our teachings, they emphasize that the core and primary basis of our identity as Muslims is servitude to God. In fact, this is literally what it means to be Muslim. To be Muslim is the one who Aslam. Aslam means what? Is the one who has submitted to God. The literal meaning of being Muslim is the one who submits to God. This is, for us as Muslims, this is the core, the primary basis of our identity. And this is why when we examine the Quran, we find that God describes His greatest creation in terms of their servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When God speaks of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, how does God describe the Prophet? He describes him in many ways. But one of the fundamental and primary ways that the Prophet is described, God says, for example, سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى. Praise and glory be to the one God who journeyed, who his servant, بعبده, from al-Masjid al-Haram to al-Masjid al-Aqsa. When God describes the rest of the prophets in the Quran, God describes them with the label of being God's servants. In the case of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, when he was born through that miraculous birth, and Maryam alayhi salam, she carries him back to her community. And they ask Maryam, they interrogate her. They say, Maryam, where did this child come from? You're not married. So how is it that you have a child? And they had all sorts of accusations. They told her, oh Maryam, what have you done? They began to judge her. What have you done? Your father was a noble person, your mother was chaste, right? يا أخت هارون ما كان أبوك امرأ سوء وما كانت أمك بغية. God inspired in Maryam. He told her, do not defend yourself. Rather, what should you do? How is she to come to her defense? God told her, point to the infant, point to the child, to Isa alayhi salam. فأشارت إليه قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا. She pointed to him, meaning what? Meaning, let him answer you. And they said, they were astonished. They said, Maryam, how can we speak and communicate with a child that is newborn? An infant child, how? قال, the Quran says, God gave Isa alayhi salam the capacity to speak as a newborn child. قال إني عبد الله. The first way that Isa alayhi salam introduced himself to the people, he didn't say what? What did he say? He said, I am the servant of God. قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا. He gave me the book, the revelation, and he made me into a prophet. Isa alayhi salam, this is the way that he introduced himself, that I am God's servant. This is who I am. When God speaks about the righteous in the Quran, those who are authentic believers, those who are good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ, the servants of God, the most merciful, who walk humbly on the face of this planet. This is how the righteous are described in the Quran. God describes them as my servants. And it is an honor and an absolute honor, the greatest honor that we can have in this life and in the next life, dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, that we acquire and that we achieve servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and none other than Allah. This is what gives us honor. This is what gives us success and salvation. So this is the core and the primary basis of our identity. And any other aspect of our identity is subsidiary to and in service of this primary core aspect of our identity. And this is important, brothers and sisters. Why? Because if we set any other aspect of our identity, whether it's our relationships, whether it is our desires, whether it is our feelings, whether it is our accomplishments in this life, if we set these other secondary aspects of our identity, if we set them at the core of our identity, we identify them as the primary basis of our identity, then what happens? Then when these secondary aspects of our identity are challenged, they're shaken and they fall, what happens to our identity? It comes crumbling down. If the core of my identity, right, if I believe that the core of my identity is my relationship, whether it's my spouse, as a husband or wife, or as a parent, or my friendship, or my social circles, then when I experience loss and breakup and tragedy, when it comes to those social relationships, what happens to my core? Falls apart. It falls apart. If my core is based only on my friendships, then when those friendships break up, when I lose that friendship, I fall. When my core is just based on my career choice, my job, then when I lose that job or when I struggle in that job, right? When I have difficulties with that business or I lose that business, what happens to my identity? Comes crumbling down. When the core of my identity is my feelings and my desires and my pleasures, then those are transient. They are temporary. They shift. Look at your feelings. Look at the amount of feelings that we have and the various feelings that we have. At one moment you are happy. At another moment you are sad. Very quickly, the turnaround is very quickly. One day you feel accomplished and great. The other day you feel down and sad. These are our feelings. They're always changing. Our emotions are always changing. They're very temporary. They're very shaky. Our desires. One day I desire this, the other day I desire that. One day I feel this way, the other day I feel that. Right? And so when it comes to the secondary aspects of our identity, if that forms the core of what I believe to be my identity, then when it's challenged, the core of my identity comes crumbling down. This is why many of us experience identity crises. Why is it that many middle-aged men, they go through an identity crisis at some point in their life? And how do they overcome this identity crisis? They go out and they buy a Corvette, right? That's the stereotypical situation, right? Because they feel that they have not accomplished the physical and material goals that they wanted to accomplish. They had an idea that by the time I turn age 40, for instance, or 50, that I would have been a millionaire. But it didn't happen, so what happens? They feel this identity crisis, a midlife, what is known as the midlife crisis. So how do they want to compensate? They go out and they buy something luxurious so they can treat themselves. But does that work? Doesn't work. Doesn't work. This is why many of us experience these identity crises. Whereas, if the core of my identity and this expression is based in something as solid and as grounded in God, because God is permanent and everything else is transient. God is permanent. مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. This is what the Quran tells us. What is with you, it comes to an end. What stays, what that we have from our material gains, our possessions, our relationships, whatever we have acquired, what remains forever? Does any of it remain forever? None of it remains forever. The only thing that is permanent in existence is God. So when you connect your core identity to servitude to God, that relationship is established, then even when you face challenges, even when you are shaken, right, you don't come crumbling down. You still have a solid foundation to stand on. This is why it's important for us to think about how to build this foundation of servitude to God. And it is for this reason, brothers and sisters, that many aspects of our other aspects of our identity, everything else, is regulated to conform to this core identity, servitude to God. Because a lot of people, they ask, why are there so many laws when it comes to our religious tradition? The halal and the haram, the permissible and the prohibited. Why are there so many regulations? Part of this is to allow every other aspect of our identity. We have so many of these aspects of our identity to regulate them, to control them, so that they conform to our core identity, which is servitude to God. Especially when it comes to our desires, brothers and sisters. Our physical and material desires. When it comes to fulfilling our physical desires. When it comes to fulfilling our base desires. For some people, they consider this to be the basis of their identity. Their particular physical attractions. And the desire to fulfill these physical attractions. Or when it comes to other material desires and gains. When it comes to the consumption of food or drink. Take the example of food and drink, right? Why is it that God has prohibited some things to consume and permitted other things to consume? Why? Because it's not just the act of physical consumption. Because what I consume, what I eat, what I ingest, affects my spirituality, dear brothers and sisters. It affects my spirituality. It's not just a matter of, oh, this is arbitrary, this is halal and this is haram. What I put into my mouth, what I feed myself, what I feed my family, what I feed my friends, it impacts their spirituality. This is why we have some traditions that say sometimes God does not answer the dua of someone. Why? Because they're consuming that which is haram. That which is haram. And what does that do? That blocks off our soul. And when our soul is blocked off, then our du'as don't go up. It affects us spiritually. This is why we have to be very careful. We have to be cautious of what we consume, what we eat, and what we drink. But even beyond haram and halal, not just a question of what is permissible and what is impermissible, going beyond what is haram, permissible, and haram, what is impermissible or prohibited, we find that there is this kind of ethics to the way that we consume and the way that we fulfill our physical and material desires. This is why our tradition encourages us to maintain moderation when we eat and drink, to control ourselves. You see, sometimes we find ourselves in situations, or we know people who they don't eat in order to live, they live in order to eat. No? Food is the most beloved thing for them in the world. If they're feeling sad, bring them food. If they're angry, bring them food. This is why they say the quickest way, sisters, pay attention, the quickest way to your husband's heart is through what? Through his belly. Some people, they live to eat. It's all about food. It's all about consumption. Whereas our tradition, it tells us, yes, food is important. We need to eat, we need to drink. But we should maintain moderation. Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu. Eat and drink, the Quran says. Hani'an. Nushajan. But do not exaggerate, do not go overboard. Maintain in moderation. There are those who take extremes. Neither do we completely deny ourselves and our family. We don't eat or consume anything at all, nor do we overdo it. And we have examples of those who came before us who were obsessed with food. You know, one of the people who was obsessed with food in the early history of Islam was Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. In Sahih Muslim, a book that is regarded as one of the most authentic in the larger Muslim community, in the Sunni Muslim community, considered Sahih Muslim as a compilation of the teachings of the Prophet that is regarded as most authentic after the Quran. In Sahih Muslim, Muslim narrates a tradition from Ibn Abbas, the Prophet's cousin. Ibn Abbas says, one day I was out in public. Says, I was playing with some of the children of Medina. He's playing with them. He's spending time with them, which was great. The Prophet used to spend time with the children. The Prophet did not express himself in a way where he ignored people in his society, members of his society. He paid attention to everyone in his society, young and old, rich and poor, man and woman. The Prophet used to play. He used to play with the children. So Ibn Abbas says, I was playing with some of the children, as-Sibyan. The Prophet, he called me. I went to him, I said, yes, Ya Rasulullah. The Prophet said, oh Ibn Abbas, go and call Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan to me. Call him. Muawiyah and his father, Abu Sufyan, we know Abu Sufyan was the bitter enemy of Rasulullah. He waged war against Rasulullah multiple times. Right? And Muawiyah, in some traditions, he even participated in some of these conflicts alongside his father against the Prophet. But at some point, towards the end of the life of the Prophet, after the conquest of Mecca, Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah and others, they embraced Islam. And this is a long and lengthy debate. It's going to take us in a different direction. They finally ended up embracing Islam. So Muawiyah is called by the Prophet. Ibn Abbas, he goes to call Muawiyah, and he sees Muawiyah is busy doing what? He's eating. So he goes to the Prophet and he says, Ya Rasulullah, Muawiyah is eating. So the Prophet waits a little while, and then he turns to Ibn Abbas after a while. He goes, go and call Muawiyah. Ibn Abbas goes to call Muawiyah. He finds Muawiyah, he's still eating. Huh? This happens a couple of times. Ibn Abbas, he comes back to the Prophet. He says, Ya Rasulullah, Muawiyah is still eating. The Prophet, this is recorded in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet, his reply was what? He raised his hands and he made a dua, a supplication. He said, Allahumma la ashba' Allahu batnah. O my Lord, do not allow Muawiyah to feel fulfilled, to feel full. This is a prayer that the Prophet made. And the traditions, they tell us that after that dua, Muawiyah was never satisfied, no matter how much he ate. Ibn Kathir, the great Sunni scholar of the medieval period, he comments on this. He says sometimes Muawiyah would eat 7 times a day and he would still not feel full. And then on the other hand, you have Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. When he is Khalifa, he writes a letter to Uthman ibn Hunayf, who was his governor of Basra. And this letter is recorded in Nahjul Balagha. It's a lengthy letter. He writes to him and he gives him advice. Uthman ibn Hunayf, when he was appointed, he spent a lot of time hanging around with the elites of Basra, spending time with them, going to their homes, eating with them, ensuring, networking with them, ensuring everything is fine. Some people, they complained that he was not doing his duties. He was not paying attention to the rest of the community. So they wrote to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam Ali wrote to Uthman ibn Hunayf. And this was the character of Imam Ali. Imam Ali, if he saw something good, he would praise it. If he saw something bad, he would criticize it. It didn't matter who did it, because he stood with the truth. He was not about personal relations. He was not about political correctness. He stood with the truth. So he writes, Uthman ibn Hunayf, he writes to him. And in the letter, he says that to him, he says, every follower has a leader whom they seek their guidance. What is the role of a leader? Is it just a title? Is it just people clap for you and they praise for you? What is the role of a leader? The role of a leader is to guide, is to uplift communities, is to correct, is to help, is to be in service. This is what a true leader is. So he says every follower has a leader whom they seek guidance from and inspiration from. And then he says, Ala wa inna imamakum. Then he speaks about himself. He says, as for your imam, Ala wa inna imamakum قد اكتفى من دنياه بطمريه ومن طعمه بقرصيه. He says, as for your imam, meaning himself, he says, out of all of the material and physical delights and needs of this world, your imam is satisfied with having ownership of 2 pieces of clothing only and eating 2 loaves of bread. 2 pieces of clothing. He wears one, it gets dirty, he wears the other one. And then vice versa. And he says, all I need is 2 loaves of bread. I eat one in the daytime, one in the evening. Khalas, that's all I need. This is a leader and this is a leader. Of course, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, Ala wa innakum la taqdiruna ala dhalik. I know, my followers, that this is difficult for you. Imam Ali knows. How many of us can survive on 2 loaves of bread every day? We want our kabuli polo and our mantu and all of the other, our biryani and everything, right? We can't survive, right? His context, Imam Ali's context, was different than our context. But the point is that even when it comes to that which is halal, it is permissible. The food is halal. It's pure, it's clean, that we maintain moderation. We don't allow our desires and our feelings to be the core component of my identity, to be completely preoccupied, always thinking about fulfilling these desires. To become engrossed in our physical and material desires. This is why Prophet Isa, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says in the hadith, I tell you this with certainty and truth. He says, anyone who is engrossed in their material and physical desires will never taste the sweetness of worship. You know, sometimes when you're ill, you have the flu, they can bring you your favorite dish before you. Bring it before you. And you eat the dish, but do you enjoy it? You don't enjoy it. You can't even taste it. It's bland. There's no taste. When you have a cold, when you have a flu. Why? Because there's an imbalance in your health system, in your body, right? This is affecting your sense of taste. Isa alayhi salam says, anytime we are engrossed means what? That the vast majority of my time and efforts is thinking about what? What am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? How much money am I going to make? Where am I going to travel? How am I going to have fun? When most of my thoughts are revolved around the fulfillment of my physical and material desires, he says, what happens? Then you are unable to taste the sweetness of worship. You stand for prayer and you don't feel anything. You recite the Quran, you don't feel anything. So this is why we are encouraged to maintain moderation. Do not allow, dear friends, if out of everything I say, you only take one thing away tonight, brothers and sisters. It is the following. Do not allow society to trick you in confusing your core and primary identity for any other secondary and subsidiary identity. This is what society is doing now. It's pushing us away from understanding our core identity of servitude to God, and instead it's replacing it with every other aspect of our identity. When we are confused, when we make this mistake, then we fail. Don't let anyone confuse you. Don't let anyone encourage you or for you to mistake your core identity for any other aspect of your identity. So we are encouraged, brothers and sisters, to build this foundation of our identity, and that is servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why when it comes to building our intellectual capacity, gaining knowledge, when it comes to building our spiritual capacity through worship and devotion, when it comes to building our ethical and moral capacities, all of this is in service of servitude to God. This is why, yes, seeking knowledge is important, but is seeking any kind of knowledge important? No. Only that which serves that objective, which is to make us stronger in our servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the knowledge that we are encouraged to seek and to develop. Those are the intellectual foundations. Even when it comes to our spirituality, it is in service of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why it is not any spiritual practice. We live in a time where we have a large variety. It's kind of like going to Baskin-Robbins, right? We have a large variety of flavors of spiritual practice. And some people, they say, well, let's try everything. Building that spiritual capacity is important for us only if it serves God. But if it starts to serve me, my ego, if I'm going to Hajj so people call me Hajj Agha, right? Or if I'm doing other things so it serves me and my family and my name and my recognition, even if it's a spiritual practice, then it is what? It is harmful. So building ourselves is in service of that foundation that is our core identity, and that is servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a lifelong challenge, brothers and sisters. It's a lifelong challenge for us. It is our internal and daily struggle. It is the struggle that you will have every day of your life. Some days it will be an easier struggle, some days it will be a more difficult struggle. But this is why God has created us. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. O human being, you have been created in turmoil and struggle until you reach your destination, which is God. It's a lifelong struggle. It's a lifelong battle that we battle every day. So how is it? Because sometimes it might be overwhelming when I think about this. I have so many challenges to build this foundation of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can sound overwhelming. Some people, they might freeze. They might say, this is too much for me. It's too big of a challenge. I can't handle it. They might freeze. They might surrender. They might give up. The best way to reach our destination is what? Is by taking small steps, brothers and sisters. Take small steps. Taking small steps in growing fully in ourselves. It's very much like driving a car at night. When you drive a car in darkness, you have your headlights on, right? The most that you can see is the degree to where your headlights show you. But that is enough to get you all the way from point A to point B. It could be hundreds of miles. You only need that amount that is right before you, that your headlights shine upon, to get you all the way. Similarly, that we take small steps, but that we make a commitment. We have to make a promise to ourselves and to God. I make this commitment. I will take the steps, even if it's one step a day. But that never to surrender, that we constantly work on building this foundation. That we focus on the present and the immediate. Too many of us, dear friends, we are engrossed in or preoccupied in thinking either about the past or the future. Either we are always thinking about the past. We're stuck in the past. We're stuck in the mistakes and the failures and the errors that we've made in the past. And what does that do? That prohibits us from moving forward. By the way, this is one of Shaitan's tactics, you know that? Sometimes, Shaitan, he makes us forget the past. As though it did not even happen. I made a mistake, an error in the past, and I forget completely about it, and I go as though it never happened. I proceed as though it did not happen. This is one tactic. The other tactic is the other extreme, that he always allows us to remember, keeps us stuck in the past. What does this do to us? We feel hopeless. How am I going to overcome my background, what I've done in the past? Or the other is that we're always stuck in the future. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next year? What's going to happen in 10 years? Always thinking about that. And what does that do? This prohibits us from focusing on the present, on the immediate. What I can do right now. What I can do at this moment. But when we focus on the immediate and the present, this allows us to move forward. It's just like in the horse races, right? If you've noticed in the horse races, or any time if you see a horse with a carriage, oftentimes you find that the horse is given blinders, right? Seen the blinders they place on horses? Why do they do that? Is it cool? Does it look like, is it nice? Does it make the horse look better? There's a purpose behind these blinders. What do? They allow the horse to focus on immediately what's right in front of it, not get distracted left and right, because the horse will get distracted. If there's another horse behind it, beside it, if there's something else going on, what happens? It gets distracted, it won't go forward. It's hard to control. They put the blinders so the horse sees right in front of it, and it continues going forward. We have to be able to put blinders. It's tempting for us to get distracted left and right. We have so many temptations and so many distractions always pulling at us left and right, center, forward, backward. But we have to be able to put up blinders so that we can see where we want to go and that we can proceed forward. When we build our foundation in servitude to God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this foundation of our identity, the core of our identity, nothing can bring us down, brothers and sisters. Nothing. Nothing can bring us down. Yeah, we might fall over every once in a while here and there, but we will stand back up. We no longer feel lonely in this world, on this journey of life. We no longer feel that sense of loneliness. And this is exactly what Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he teaches us. Imam Ali alayhi salam in the famous hadith, He says, do not feel afraid on the path of truth because of the small numbers of those who travel it. It's natural, right? If you're on a path and you find that there are a small number of people on that path, but on the other side, what's happening? There's a lot of people going the other way. We might feel a sense of fear. What's happening? Why is everyone going that way? Why are so few people going this way? Right? Or if you're driving, sometimes for those who, you take road trips from here to Canada. I know a lot of brothers and sisters, they do this. Right? You might go through some small roads, through villages. It's a very beautiful drive, by the way. I've done it myself. Through Pennsylvania. Very beautiful, right? It's a small road. It goes through villages. And sometimes you'll find that as much as you can see before you or behind you, there's no other cars, especially if it's in the evening, and it can get kind of scary, right? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, do not feel fear. Do not be afraid. If you know that you are on the right path, you are on the path of truth, don't look around and look for numbers. Don't feel lonely and afraid because you know you're on the right track. And this is one of the greatest lessons of Ashura, brothers and sisters. One of the greatest lessons. A group of less than 100 facing an army of tens of thousands. It's a trembling sight. It's a trembling sight. Imagine yourself. I want you to take a moment now. Just take one moment. Imagine yourself. You are with a group. There's more than 100 people here tonight. Imagine you are with a group of less than 100 people and you are facing an army of tens of thousands. Will you not be afraid? Of course we'll feel afraid. But this is the lesson that we learn from Imam Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt, that they stood firm in the way of truth because they knew, they had built those foundations. They knew why they were there. They knew who they were. They knew who they were serving and what was the purpose of their existence there. And so they did not waver. This is the lesson we learn even before the battlefield of Karbala on the day of Ashura. This is the lesson that we learn from Muslim ibn Aqil alayhi salam. Muslim, who was the Imam's cousin and his emissary. The Imam, after he left from Medina, he went to Mecca. And when he was in Mecca, he started to receive lots of invitations from the people of Kufa to come to them. Ya ibn Rasulullah, come to our assistance. Come to our help. We are here. We are ready for you. We are under your command. So Imam Hussein, when he's in Mecca, he sends his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil to Kufa as an emissary. Muslim, go and scope the place. Go and figure out what's going on here. So Muslim ibn Aqil, he goes. And he arrives to Kufa. And in Kufa, he is surrounded by people who welcome him and they support him. Muslim is here, the emissary of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And then Ibn Ziyad, Ubaydillah ibn Ziyad, he is sent from Basra to come all the way to Kufa. Why? Because he was a ruthless governor. Because it only took the soul and the heart of someone as ruthless as Ubaydillah ibn Ziyad to do what was needed to be done. So he comes and he threatens everyone. The tradition says that Muslim is in the mosque of Kufa and people are behind him. They are following him in prayer. And one by one they begin to drop like flies. Muslim turns around, he sees himself all alone. All alone, everyone is gone. Everyone has betrayed him, they've left him, they've abandoned him. So he goes into the streets and alleys of Kufa. He's wandering around. What does he do? The tradition says he goes to the home of a pious lady by the name of Taw'a, and he sits by her doorstep. She comes out, she notices a strange man is sitting there. She tells him, "Oh, strange man, who are you? What are you doing here? Don't sit here by my door, go somewhere else." He identifies himself to her. He says, "I am Muslim ibn Aqil." She says, "You are Muslim, the cousin of Abu Abdullah?" He says, "Yes." She tells him, "People have betrayed you, they've left you." He says, "Yes, they've left me." She tells him, "Come inside the home. You are not safe out here, come inside." This noble lady, she takes care of him. She gives him a place to stay. She gives him food. Muslim spends the entire night in devotion in the home of Taw'a. But she warns him, she says, "You know, my son, you have to leave, because if my son comes here, this is going to be dangerous for you." And her son, he arrives, and he recognizes what's going on, and he goes, and he reports Muslim's presence. The authorities are looking for Muslim. And so they come to him. But this is Muslim ibn Aqil, the son of Abu Talib. This is the family of Abu Talib. They are brave. This is the family that produces Ali ibn Abi Talib, produces the rest of Banu Abu Talib. So he goes out and he defends himself. He fights. He's all alone. One man against and surrounded by enemies. They pelt him from every direction. They throw spears and arrows at him. They fight him until he is injured and he falls. He's helpless. There's no one around him. They take him and they drag him to the governor's mansion. And they go before the governor, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. They take him up. He's drenched in his blood, the tradition says. They take him up. Some of the reports, they say that Muslim ibn Aqil, at this point, he asks the guard to give him some water. He's exhausted. He's dehydrated. He asks for some water. They bring for him a bucket of water. Muslim wants to drink, but he is bleeding so intensely that the bucket is filled with blood. He's not able to drink it. Muslim looks up. He knows. And so he is taken up all the way to the top of the governor's mansion. And there he is flogged. And then he is given a final chance. Do you have any final words or requests? Muslim says, "Allow me during this moment to turn in prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Look at this. Muslim, in this moment, whom does he turn to? He turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his creator, his sustainer. And so he prays his prayer. And then afterwards, Muslim begins to weep and cry. They look at him and they tell him, "Muslim, why are you weeping? Are you afraid? It's we caught you. You came in so courageously and you assumed that you would take over. Now you are crying after we have captured you and you are in this state and you are seeing death before you." He says, "I'm not crying for myself. I am crying for my master, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. You called him. You are betraying him. You called the grandson of the Prophet to you for assistance and you have betrayed him. I am crying for the fate of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein." The tradition says that at this point Muslim was beheaded. And as Imam Hussein is making his way towards Kufa, the news of the martyrdom of his beloved cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil, it reaches him. The tradition says that among those who were with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein were the children of Muslim, in particular his daughter Hamida. Imam Hussein receives the news of the murder of his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil.
He says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Then he goes and he embraces Hamida, this young daughter of Muslim. The tradition says he places his hand on her head and he wipes on her head. Hamida, she looks up at Imam Hussein. She says, oh Imam, what are you doing? Isn't this the action that is done to one who is orphaned? We wipe on their head, we wipe on the head of an orphan. Is there something that has happened to my father? What has happened to my father? Imam Hussein, he embraces her. He says, oh Hamida, from now on I am your father. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله وسلم عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together, let us pay our respects. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. And for the souls of the mu'mineen and mu'minat, all of the marhumin, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha مع الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على